What's up, my friends? My name is Matthew Deery, and I am coming to you with the making of Mortal Kombat 2 in 2020, Part 2. This video is broken down into just all post-production, and obviously this video is very long, and the making of Part 1 is pretty long as well, and so obviously you can see why I broke them into two distinct parts because of the length of the video, as well as for my sanity, because obviously it's a lot of work to put together videos of this length, and I tried really hard to make this part 2 as short as possible, but post-production was just such a huge portion of the project, and it was such a time suck, and so much effort and creative problem solving and thinking went into making this project happen that obviously you end up with a little bit longer of an explainer. My intention with this second making of video was for it to debut the following week after the short film and the making of 1 dropped on March 2nd, but to be completely honest, I've been disheartened and dismayed and just a little sad about the way that this video has performed, and that's not to say that creatively I was displeased with how it came out from my mind to the page to final product, as well as the way that it was received by my network and those who saw it, people who were fans of Mortal Kombat 2 or stuck in Zoom meetings the past year. A lot of encouraging words and people who were impressed with the project. But one of my goals for this project was for this short film to be kind of a springboard for exposure for myself for this channel, and we fell well short of that goal, and it's not even close. And so it was definitely discouraging for me to see the video views as time went on just to really just trickle through instead of being a resounding success. And so I've said in the past on this channel that views are not everything, and it's not even something that I'm really prioritizing, but for this particular project, just based on how much time and effort went into it and really what I thought it could be and really how it turned out, I just thought that it was going to have a lot of exposure. And I set a lot of things in motion before with letting people know when it was going to premiere and telling people how they could help promote it, and being active on Twitter and Reddit and Facebook, and really trying to find ways to help get more exposure for this project, as well as creating this beautiful thumbnail.
Excellent.
And it fell well short. I had goals in the tens of thousands for views, and the video doesn't even have 1,000 views right now. It doesn't even have 800. So when you fall that short, it's definitely discouraging. And again, views aren't everything. I learned so much from this project. I enjoyed so much collaborating with people and being able to have all this fun doing what I love. And I got a lot better in Davinci and After Effects. And like I said, this was a great learning experience. But at the same time, when you set out goals and you fall short of them as a creative, you put yourself out there, and it's a little bit of a gut punch when you see results like this. And so certainly I am blessed. I am so blessed to be able to have this be a valley in my life. There are people in this world who are struggling and going through so much worse than what I am. But again, as a creative, when you really pour yourself into a project like I definitely did with this, it's like I said, it's disheartening to see this result. So that's enough of that. Let's dive into the post-production on this project, where the magic happened and where this whole thing all came together, and where I spent hours and hours and hours working through this. And I'm excited for the very few of you who are watching to check out how it came together. So once Johnny Cage appears here at about the 3-minute mark, we have 8 simultaneous video tracks all on screen at the same time. All these characters having their reactions synced up to the action of the call. All of these things needing to be synced with the scripts being read at different pace and different locations and different times. All of this needing to come together and feel fluid. And trust me, it was not easy. This edit was so frustrating in so many different ways. I got distraught so many times throughout this project, and I didn't even know if it was worth it at times, and I even told my wife several times, don't ever let me do this again. Why did I do this? Why did I start this project? But before I even really jumped into the deep end of the pool with this edit, I did some work to figure out what the zoom call grid was going to look like. So I wanted the screen to feel similar to the character selection screen in Mortal Kombat 2 with the gray cracked rock looking backdrop. And then the character selection icons would be showing up as each character was speaking. I was able to take a few of these larger pieces from the loading screen and cobble the big pieces together, and then with the healing brush tool in Photoshop, mask where all these pieces came together. I also wanted to add a frame around our call buttons, and I stole it from here, and the box fit over these buttons almost perfectly with no drastic resizing. With this project, there were a lot of assets that I had to source online, from sound effects to graphics, as well as a lot of graphics and pieces and components that I had to build on my own in Photoshop and After Effects. So one of the very first things that I set out to create was the loading screen when we were jumping into the video. I wanted it to really have a feeling of the opening of Mortal Kombat 2, but just a little bit more modernized, like it's in 2020. So I created this in After Effects. I did this part of the animation a long time ago, pretty much right when the script was finished. I really wanted to do this to sink my teeth into something and feel like this project had some momentum moving forward. And I could use this animation to tease this project on Instagram and to let people know that I was working on this. When I was doing my research for this game and really just diving deep into all things Mortal Kombat, watching the history of the game and behind the scenes making of the game and character playthroughs and YouTubers talking about it and people waxing nostalgic about it, I actually stumbled across this YouTube channel, Bitplex, which just has amazing recreations of Mortal Kombat 2 in 3D. And I actually just was so impressed that I figured if I could get some of this footage and I could put it into this video, what a fun way to collaborate. So I reached out to Bitplex to see if he was interested in being a part of this project. So after I reached out to him, I thought of how his content could be leveraged, and I thought about the screen share like you do in a video meeting. When I reached out to Bitplex, Steve is actually his name. His name's not actually Bitplex. I requested the Sonya and Kano shots to play on the line. They're tied up at the moment. And you can imagine I was over the moon when he replied and said that he was not only interested in collaborating and giving me these two shots, but he was actually going to provide me a few other shots as well, including the reptile head munch, as well as the opening 8-bit animation that kicks off the film itself. And I really think that this opening animation with the 8-bit look of the shot, Mortal Kombat 2 in 2020, and then to a more polished connecting screen that I created, it's a perfect transition from the old into the Mortal Kombat of 2020. So soon after filming with Corey, I packaged up the fatality part and I sent it off to Cody at Rowan FX. So once I settled on Johnny Cage's head exploding, I knew I needed to outsource help for that. This type of VFX is greatly above my pay grade. When reaching out to Cody, I told him about the project, and I told him obviously about how this was self-financed and kind of just a passion project. And aside from being able to make somebody's head explode, which is fun, Cody agreed to take a fraction of his normal full rate, which somebody of his skills and experience, he is not cheap. And I appreciate you, Cody, for coming on and being a part of this project. Without even needing to say so, Cody is a much more seasoned VFX artist than myself, so I actually had him walk me through his process of creating this shot for Johnny Cage. He started the process in After Effects, and he used Mocha Pro, and he tracked all of these tracking markers that we put along Johnny Cage's neckline. And then he used After Effects' awesome content-aware fill feature, and he created those plates that he ended up importing into Photoshop, and then he removed all of the markers within Photoshop. He then saved that progress in Photoshop, and then it updates the plates in After Effects. He then used the Roto Brush tool to extract Johnny Cage from the wall, which is actually pretty simple. And then Cody jumped into Blender. He imported the non-cleaned up footage into Blender, and he used the 3D tracking features it offers to create a digital camera that matches the footage itself. So then he created an object solver and he tracked all the markers on our talent. Blender then creates 3D object data that can have other objects parented to it, like a fake exploding head. Using an add-on for Blender called Face Builder, he quickly created a 3D model of Corey's face. Using that model, he then made cuts to where he wanted the head to break open or start to actually explode. He then applied a cloth physics simulation to the head, and he added a force to the scene which makes the head actually blow open.
No ending!
He then found 3D models online for the bones and the brain, and then retextured them to make them more bloody. Obviously this is a fatality, so you need a little bit of gore. He then used an add-on called Wiggly Bones for the spine, throat, and the tongue physics. Now it might seem like some of these small details are overkill, but really these details and nuances are really what helps sell the visual effect. Cody then used some stock assets from Footage Crate for some extra blood on the explosion, as well as the splat on the wall behind him. What we end up with is this final shot. Outside of the graphic treatments that I put together in After Effects, I edited the entirety of this project within Davinci Resolve. And I recently switched over to Davinci Resolve from Final Cut Pro, as well as the world's glitchiest and most overpriced non-linear editor, Adobe Premiere. And I edited this in Resolve as opposed to, say, Final Cut Pro, because most recently I've been more comfortable editing in this program because that's what I've been using most often. And Davinci worked great. It really did do very well. Outside of some user error things with keyframing, where I would have keyframes copying, pasting from one clip to another, it really has worked fantastic. Now, all the content that I filmed on my Blackmagic 4K, and I filmed Blackmagic RAW, which are no small file sizes by any measure. And then I also had Deborah's content when we filmed remotely. She filmed on her 70D, which those are HD files, but by no measure is this a small chunk of information. So especially towards the end when Johnny's in the mix and we have 8 continuous video feeds. So the first thing that I did when I brought all of this footage in was I generated optimized media. So I created these proxy files so I could actually work with this footage and be able to have playback on all of my content. And even though I had this much weight on my timeline, the proxy files worked great, and I really didn't have a lot of lag as I was working through this edit. So one of the first things that I had to do was figure out how to move and resize these clips as a new character enters the chat. And this by far was my biggest challenge on the edit. The first couple were manageable, but then once Katana and Jade and Noob and Johnny came in, it got tough to resize and crop and move that many video clips. So when a new character comes into frame, that's definitely when I got hung up the most, when I felt the most defeated, when I got the most frustrated. These moments were when I would stop and take a break for a couple of days, just because sometimes I just didn't feel like I was making any progress with how slow it was to be continuously editing 3, 4, 5 different video feeds as this project continued to grow. And it almost, I mean, not almost, but as I got deeper into the project, it got slower and slower and slower in terms of the progress. When I had 3 characters to start, I kind of buzzed through that in a few hours and formatting that, and then all of a sudden it was 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, and it really just started to slow me down. And then I would have a keyframe mistake, and a frame is jumping all over. And like I said, this is really when I really struggled to find the balance of how these characters were going to fit within the frame as a new character came in. This window always stays the same size, And I also had the issue to figure out is how do I get all of these squares to be the same, with all of these male ninjas having the exact same black magic 4K raw footage. It was a little bit easier to copy and paste the settings. Deborah's settings were obviously different because she had native high definition footage. And so then I had to really figure out ways where I would lay a layer on top of another and change the opacity and then resize and crop it. And it was just a lot of really tedious work. And like I said, this is the type of stuff that made this edit just feel like a real slog. More creative problem solving on my part was figuring out how to feature the character who was speaking. Now, oftentimes in a Zoom or video conference meeting, it is from your perspective. So your little video feed is the smallest or oftentimes hidden, and then there's an even distribution of the other attendees within the meeting. And because this meeting isn't really from the point of view of any one character, I mean, you could say Sub-Zero is kind of the first one that we follow into the meeting, but it's not really from his perspective because he oftentimes ends up in the grid or the fray, as I called it. Again, the color work isn't done on Scorpion yet as I'm filming this. But I wanted to be able to create a featured speaker window so the audience would be able to follow the action of who is speaking, and it wasn't going to be a guessing game, or they weren't going to have to follow a little green glowing audio speaker box and look into this whole entire grid. Even if they were evenly spread out on the frame, they would still be smaller. And as we worked our way up to the comedic punchlines like friendship, or more importantly our crescendo or the fatality of the video itself, I really wanted this moment to be able to be featured and not happen in a small box within the fray. So more logistics that I had to figure out within the duration of the edit is when we have a character go from the speaking window back into the fray, where is their position within this grid? And so do they have a set position each time? And what I ended up settling upon was just replacing, when Johnny Cage is speaking here, Katana speaks next. So what I do is I just replace Katana and Johnny Cage with one another, and I do that throughout the edit. It just seemed like the easiest way to be able to have a little bit more expediency to working through this edit, as opposed to trying to keyframe and reformat all of the grid each time somebody, if they had a set position, so to speak. And it seems to flow pretty well, and I think it worked out. Video conference calls take place over distance as well as over an internet connection, and with that leads to latency in both audio and visual, and that leads to dropped calls, frozen stills, blurred images, and really that greatly benefited me as the editor on this project, and that allowed us in production to not have to worry about perfectly reading the script the exact same way every single time, the same timing, the same exact cadence, and that allowed me to worry about it in post. And you can see here is when Sub-Zero is revealing that there is indeed a mask mandate. And what I did is I end up calling it out with markers with a lot of the characters here. What I did is I just made sure that all of those moments lined up, the important moments where people are clapping or cheering, or where people are reacting to Johnny Cage's head exploding. I'm making sure that these moments are lined up, and sometimes in order to get to these moments, I had to fake all of these latency issues with a frozen character, and I'd take an effect and I'd put a mosaic blur on it, or I would speed up footage or slow down footage into slow motion and then pick it up. And I did it a couple of times with audio as well, and you can see I have all these little cuts within we don't have one continuous video feed here in any of these layers. They all have these cuts, so I was able to line up all of these signature moments. You can see here's our head explosion, and all the characters are reacting at the same time, and that was all laid out by this timing that I created by having all of these latency issues built into the edit. Now, as I mentioned before, the ever-evolving script, as I was working through a very rough cut of the video with some test footage that I shot, I hadn't even actually filmed my part as Sub-Zero yet. I was really just working with this test footage, and I had the idea to have Sub-Zero have the breath effect that comes into play. And I will say that is another tedious part to all of this. As you can see on this top timeline here, these are all Sub-Zero's effects that had to follow him in the frame, and they all had to be formatted to fit here. And then when I had a breath effect, when I would get cut halfway through, I had to have it continue in another frame in a smaller format. So anyway, when I was looking for this breath effect, I found these snow effects, and this idea hit me that it would be kind of cool to add this snow effect into the mix. And so when I filmed with myself as Sub-Zero, I kind of thought, like, how am I going to make this effect actually happen? And I knew that Sub-Zero in the script was going to be continuously agitated as he was getting interrupted by Katana. Even though everybody wasn't there, he wanted to start on time because it was 9 a.m. and he was getting agitated, and I thought, well, let's have him spaz out and shoot his ice or some sort of freeze effect somewhere, but I didn't really know how to do it. And I kind of settled on the idea of getting his hands up out of frame so we didn't have to see any of the ice blast out of his hands. And then I added the sound effect, and then I was able to have the snow effect come down. And like I said, I didn't really want to get crazy and ask Cody to take on something I couldn't accomplish on my own and push the video's release date even further down the road, as well as push out my budget. So I really thought that this was something that I was going to take on myself, something that I could do within my own capabilities in After Effects. I purchased 2 snow effect clips, snow falling in a medium shot and snow falling in a close-up. I brought this Sub-Zero clip into After Effects after I filmed. I duplicated this clip into another layer, and then I rotoscoped myself out and tracked my movements within one of those layers. I then deleted the background from that layer. I did this because I wanted to do this clip right, and I didn't just want the snow to be falling in front of Sub-Zero. It would also be distracting, and it really didn't look all that good. So then what I did is I took when I rotoscoped myself out, I put that layer on top of this medium snow shot, which makes it look like the snow is falling behind Sub-Zero. And then I took the close-up shot of the snow and I laid that on top of this rotoscoped layer. And so then that gives some depth to the image, with the snow falling in, the snow that's falling closer to the camera being a little bit bigger, and the snow that's falling further away from the camera being a little bit smaller. I also changed the opacity on the snow that is in the foreground, just because I, again, didn't want it to be too distracting from the message that he was unveiling. Now, I will say the friendship work in After Effects was a real pain. I started off by downloading a high-definition version of the friendship from Mortal Kombat 2 from the actual gameplay itself, and I brought that footage into After Effects. I again used the rotoscope tool to work around the letters, but because of this low-quality old 8-bit footage from 1994, the software was having trouble precisely tracking around the letters as they bounced. So, frame by frame, I had to precisely track each letter. And as I would move forward a frame, there was always small tweaks and adjustments that had to be made. But instead of doing this for the duration of the letters bouncing up and down, which is about 5 seconds, I simply rotoscoped one cycle, up and then down, and then I exported that clip with no background, and then I brought it into Davinci, and then I just repeated the clip over and over as needed. The Finish Him and Fatality graphics were much easier because with some digging I found some green screen graphics on YouTube in high definition, and I simply was able to bring that content into After Effects, remove the green screen, and we were setting sail. For this connecting graphic here, I wanted to be able to establish this was some sort of Zoom meeting. I was able to find the alphabet of all of the characters, and by that I mean all the letters of the alphabet in this Mortal Kombat 2 font. And I was able to find this, and it had some green and some red, and so I had to go through and erase it and kind of build all of these letters up to create this graphic, because I hadn't thought about actually just looking for and downloading a Mortal Kombat 2 font and downloading it into my font book on my Mac. And so that is actually what I ended up doing, was downloading Mortal Kombat 2 font, and this graphic was a million times easier to create than the connecting one. Another important part of this project was color grading, and if you watch the making of part 1, you know that I bought one Sub-Zero costume and one Katana costume, and then I just swapped the colors in post, which is exactly what they did in the early Mortal Kombat games. They took Scorpion video captures, and then they turned that into Sub-Zero and Reptile and Smoke, and as well as Katana and Mileena and Jade. And so I did this to keep costs down, as well as be a little bit more efficient with shooting, as not having Deborah do 3 costume changes. So I created color masks in Davinci. I grabbed the blue of Sub-Zero and Katana and changed it to green and purple and yellow. And from the broad perspective, it turned out pretty well. For most people watching, they're never going to notice some of the miscues from this type of color swapping, and it ended up being really nice in most parts. But then there's just little parts of the video where along Deborah's headband that you'd see remnants of Katana's blue as opposed to Mileena, and so I'd work hard on polishing that. But really the hardest one was Scorpion by far, blue to yellow. Mitch talks with his hands a lot, and we have a get over here and a friendship doll, and so he's moving his hands across his vest, and so there's points where there's motion blur, and you can see blue underneath his hands swiping across. And certainly Mitch, I didn't light probably as well as I should have. I wanted him to be, look like a Ninja Spectre. He's Scorpion, he's supposed to be hellish. But I should have lit him a little bit better so I could have a little more even color of the blue, so then when I needed to pull the blue and turn it to yellow, it would have been a little easier, because a lot of times there's so many shadows that when I tried to pull that blue, this is a darker blue and this gets darker, and so it doesn't really come out perfect. And I had to get to a point where I'm deciding if somebody's watching it on their phone, or 800 people are watching it, so who cares? No, I care. I do. I'm always kind of putting myself up to the standard. If somebody who is a great color grader, or my strongest critics, I want to impress them. And so I did my best to kind of walk that tightrope, or balance that between the two, and realize that it is just a short film, and it's supposed to be fun, and it's not going to be perfect. And then you kind of get to the point where you start pulling your hair, and you're thinking, I can't waste any more time trying to make Scorpion look perfect. And overall, I mean, they all turned out pretty good, and from most of the viewers' perspective, I mean, it sells just based on the fact that you can see all of the distinct colors. So that was my process for doing the color swaps. I did a lot of other color grading in this project. Again, we shot in Blackmagic Raw, which is not really, there's not a lot of contrast or saturation to the image, so I had to do a lot to really make these images come alive. It is a video game after all, with a lot of saturation and poppy colors, and so I definitely went and made sure that I brought out like the green in Reptile's image of the Titan tube behind him, or the red behind Scorpion. I brought up some, I made sure to isolate people's skin tones and bring a little bit more richness to that, especially with Deborah. And for myself as Sub-Zero, I made sure that I isolated my skin tones and made those a little bit more cooler and blue. And for Johnny Cage, if you don't believe it, Corey actually did go tanning before we did this project. But I isolated his skin tones, made him really tan and warm, and then I created like a little vignette around the outside of the image, made it feel a little bit more Hollywood or cinematic. And a lot of those details are things that people might not notice. But again, as the creator, I wanted to go above and beyond to make these things stand out. So far I've talked about the visual, the video, the graphics, the VFX, and obviously that is only one half of the equation. You have video and you have audio. And for the music, I'll get to that in a second, but I had to use a lot of sound effects to help progress the video and really make it feel more full. Now you can see down here in the audio portion of my timeline, each character's dialogue is color coded to their speakers. So we have Scorpion here and Reptile, and Melina shows up here. But then I have Scorpion's sound effects get over here. I didn't actually have Mitch say that, as well as having a lot of audio components from Shao Kahn, who is voiced by Steve Ritchie. And if you don't know Steve Ritchie's backstory and how he got involved with Ed Boon and his team, it's actually quite a cool one. But I used really mostly only sound effects of Shao Kahn from Mortal Kombat 2, and I think that sometimes it even kind of serves as a laugh track when we have his laughing moments behind, or Superb, and it really kind of helps it helps it feel a little bit more full. So I always knew I wanted the character's name to be announced as they entered into the meeting. It was part of the original draft of the script. You know, when you click you select your character, Katana. I always knew I wanted that to be a part of the project. And the first time that I showed Sean a rough draft of the video, he said, like, this feels really clunky when the new characters are coming in. And so one of the things that I did is I added this video chime effect, Katana, and that kind of helped it feel a little bit more fluid. It was kind of a bridge to their entrance. Now, one of the things that I struggled with, however, was finding clean audio of all of these characters' names, as well as, you know, these Shao Kahn bits that I sprinkled throughout. And when I was able to just be able to rip, you know, character selection screen from a playthrough of the game, when, you know, you select Katana, it says Katana, but then there's music in the background, or some sort of other sound effects in the background, and that's not clean. And so when I was using these placeholders, it just really wasn't working as well as I hoped. And I searched and I searched, and I really just was struggling to find clean audio of really anything. And I stumbled across this website, 101 Soundboards, and there they all were, all the characters that I needed, from Jade and Smoke and Scorpion and Reptile, all these clean reads of these names. And it was just a remarkable day, and one where I felt like I had a huge breakthrough on this project. And you might not think that it's that big of a deal, but when I was using these placeholders that had their own little katana and then music, and then I had a music track underneath, there was some sort of interference. There was like they were rubbing each other the wrong way. And having clean audio of all of these clips really helped me progress and feel like I was making progress. And with that, that's when I kind of stumbled on the idea of sprinkling in Shao Kahn and the laughs and all of these different pieces. And I can say that that was really a huge step of progress on this project. Now, arguably the most important moment where sound effects are going to play the biggest role in this project is with the head explosion. Now, Cody did a great job with the visual, but again, that's only half of the equation. So we really need sound effects to help sell this moment. And so you can see here we have our audio portion of the timeline again, and Johnny is coming off of mute where he's talking to his doctor, and I added a little sniffle sound effect here. And one of the things that I did is his audio is here in teal, and with each time that he's coughing, I added a little bit of a bang hit and a low frequency boom, and I brought those levels down just to add a little extra oomph to each one of his coughs. It also kind of helps us feel like these coughs are leading to something maybe a little bit more sinister. You can see each time he's coughing, I'm adding this bang hit, and we have our finish him, and then our music with that. And then each time we're doing the bang hit with the cough. And then for the actual head explosion itself, I found a sound effect that is like an explosion of a body grenade is what it's called, and it kind of sounds like a squashing of a watermelon or something like that, that really gutsy. And so that sound effect is really the most prominent one here, as well as I found an actual grenade explosion, which is a little bit more of a kaboom sound effect. And then because there's a cough that makes the head explode, again, I have these bang hits to help sell the cough. And then just here after our head explodes, we have our characters reacting, and that audio really kind of, that reaction kind of helps bring a little bit more life to it. And oftentimes you can feel like when you get into sound design, it feels like it might not be as important, but it really helps sell the visual and really kind of plays a bigger role than you might believe, especially for people, some people might watch this on their phone and not get the full experience, but anybody who is watching this on a TV at home with with nice speakers or in headphones are really going to get a full experience. And even if they're not getting the full experience, for my personal sake, for being the creator of this project, I want it to be as good as can be. For this project, I sourced music exclusively from Mortal Kombat 2, which is a theme. I wanted all of my gathered assets to be from Mortal Kombat 2, from the music to the sound effects to the graphics, like Friendship and Finish Him. I didn't want Finish Him to be from Mortal Kombat 1 or Mortal Kombat 3. I wanted everything to be original to this game, so it felt all in the same family. And so that was definitely more of a challenge to find specific assets for this one game. But for the music, it was actually pretty easy. I was able to find the original music on YouTube, and I was able to rip that and just lay that into the edit. And then I just had to pick out which songs I wanted to use and where I wanted to use them. And then I just have some nice transitions that I created with dialogue over the top, and the song kind of feels like it naturally changes, as well as I had to make sure that I had the right Finish Him type music, and then after the fatality comes, there's a little bit of a wah. I wanted to source that. Did you get that? I wanted to make sure that I sourced that properly as well. And as you can see from the length of this video and all the work that was within, it was so much hard work to make this project come together. And clearly, as the editor on this project, you can see a lot of that fell on my shoulders, and you can imagine it was difficult to persevere at times. But I definitely grew as an editor, I definitely grew as a creative problem solver, and despite the video underperforming and leaving a little bit of a lump in my throat, I definitely was happy with how this video turned out in the edit. So if you've made it to the end of this video, wow, good for you. I am so grateful for your time and your curiosity to see how this project came together. Again, if you've made it this far, make sure you give this video a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I am excited for some other projects and videos that I have coming here in 2021. Obviously, I will lower my expectations accordingly, but I will finish this video again by saying thank you, and I love you. Spread love in this world. I'll see you on the next one. If my wife ends up watching this, thank you, Katie, so much for helping me and being my support system through all this. I honestly could not have done it without her. There were so many struggles and so many times when I would just plop onto the bed and just say, why am I doing this?